Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So in the last episode, we looked at some of the interesting features about the carbon footprint. Now, one thing you have to remember there, right? The carbon footprint, which we haven't unfortunately looked in a bit of a detail, that's the carbon footprint stages, right? Now, carbon footprint have, they could have different stages. For instance, let me go here. Um, Wait a second. Here, right? So we got different stage here. Now each stage means different thing, right? So for instance, let's start with the first stage, right? The reason why I wanted to talk about this today, right? Because what will happen is, right, when you create a carbon footprint, it has to go through different cycle or different stage, right? Auditing, internal auditing, external auditing, data validation, data collection, so I'm just gonna go through a few of them just to give you an idea what it even means, right? So first thing, let's look at the emission source confirmation, right? So in this stage, so let's say if I put this, right? So what will happen? The user confirms whether to include an individual asset in the carbon footprint. So if I said this, right? So since we are talking about the vehicle asset, so in this, a user will confirm whether to include an individual asset in this carbon footprint. That's one of the stages. Then we have data collection. So all when we are actually collecting all consumption records, energy consumption records, right? And when we are entering those information in the system, so we normally use that as a data collection. Then we have data validation, where user determines, when, let's say if this is a status, right? So it goes to a validation state when someone else look at it to see whether the entered information is correct, whether the entered data matches the requirement. Because obviously, what happens, right? You don't want to capture the faulty information, right? Because if you capture the faulty information, then it will give you a faulty in output data in terms of emission. So in terms of emission, all right, and then based on that, if you have to make a strategic decision to achieve the net zero, then you might have an incorrect data, which is a guiding factor, right? So you don't really want that. So to mitigate that, you need to have someone else who actually pay attention to the data uh, that's out there, and raise if there's an issue, just to flag it. Then you have internal audit. So an internal auditor will pretty much validate the energy consumption and carbon footprint information. Then you have external auditor, just the same, validates the carbon footprint information. Then once everything is done, you mark the status as completed, right? Just to show that, okay, so my carbon footprint, the data, whatever entered, so it's been validated by internal auditor, external auditor, so everything looks all right. So the status is marked as completed. So we, like I said, right, there are different phases that has to go through, and you can use this footprint stage. Now again, if you are a business, right, you may not have to go through every stage. You might say, okay, I might want to say emission source, or perhaps, or even if you don't want to do that, you can start with data collection, then data validation, maybe an external audit, and done. Okay, so it just depends on the on the company process you have in place, right? It just varies from a company to company. It won't be same for every organization out there. So just remember that. Okay, so that's great. Now, one more thing I just wanted to mention. It's a Salesforce feature, right? Pretty interesting feature, which you have seen it zillions of times. So I have this carbon credit allocation, right? Now, if you don't want to see this information in the list view, right, you obviously can use the Kanban, right? I presume everyone knows about it. I mean, I sometimes like to use a Kanban view. Not everything, but for some, it's easy to drag and drop, and some users are more comfortable using a Kanban view if there's an expectation to perform certain task on a record. So, for instance, If I go, there's no Kanban view for that, which is fine. So what I'll do, vehicle carbon footprints. Okay, this is the one we're actually talking about to begin with, right? Okay, so I don't like the list view. Okay, so I can pretty much use a Kanban view to view the information, right? So not here, here. Okay, so it's a nice interface. It's a beautiful interface, because like even if you're using Jira or other Kanban board, right, you will appreciate how useful a Kanban board is, right, rather than a list view. So this view is pretty useful in my opinion. You can pretty much like none to drag and drop to the pending approval, and if this has been approved, you can drag and drop, right? So it just depends on the business process you have in place. So yeah, okay. Now that's one thing. Now there's something I wanted to talk about, which is called as the carbon inventory. Okay, so uh, just called something. Hang on a second. Let me see. What is it called? Carbon uh, inventory. Oh yeah, annual emission inventory. Right. Sorry. So now, what is this? You might be wondering, right? Well, this is so we have calculated carbon footprint, right? Now that's all great. Now, what if you wanted to create an annual emission inventory record for any given year, so that you can roll up all your carbon footprint for all the sources and activities? Then you need to have uh, you know annual emission inventory record in place. Now, what that will do is um, it is to set a science-based target, okay, in line with Science-Based Target Initiative, which is SBTI criteria. Um, so, so that's one of the thing. Um, so that, yeah, you can also use your reporting on a footprint, uh, footprint stage reporting you can use. So this is really important if you wanted to set a science-based target. So so this comes under annual um, inventory. So if I look at one of it, right? So you have this scope three structure, scope two, and all kind of stuff, right? So this is just to, like I said, it will give you more information if you wanted to roll up the carbon footprint for all sources and activities for a time period. Um, so yeah, that's and yeah, and one last thing I wanted to talk about, which is I guess it's quite important. So what if you capture the information, right? Which is great. Now, what if the fuel consumption changes for whatever reason? You added the information, and let's look at it. So if I go to vehicle emission source, if I look this, not this one. Uh, Sorry, not that one. Footprint. This name sometimes confuses me, but that's okay. All right, let's look at the stationary if that works. Okay, so we have the stationary asset carbon footprint, right? Pretty pretty good information here. Now, for whatever reason, if the information changes, right? Let's say, nah, this is not a good example. I don't know. I'm just not really feeling for this example, right? Okay. All right. This is, I can explain using a vehicle one, right? Let's say you have the vehicle carbon footprint. It's just for 2019, right? Let's say for whatever reason you enter the wrong information or the fuel consumption changes for whatever reason, right? Then obviously you can't rely on existing data, right? You need to recalculate the information. Now, how to do that? If you look at the screen, you might say, I don't have much information there, right? How to do that? So it's pretty simple. You go here and you just recalculate it. right? It will. All right. So you can recalculate twice. So it will recalculate the stuff for you behind the scene. It might take a wee while just to get that information for you, but this is a pretty powerful option in my opinion, because if you really wanted um, to get the latest information, right, you need to use the recalculate functionality. Right. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in this episode. I mean, we looked at something about the building asset, sorry, the vehicle asset, building asset, which is stationary asset, and like I said in one of the episodes, the data center is a little bit different, right? But in general, most of the companies won't have data center. Uh, those were in the past where most of the IT firms used to have their own data center. I'm not saying that now companies uh, have completely discarded. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is that most of them has migrated to cloud. But that being said, there are a few companies, or pretty much there are many companies out there who uses the hybrid, right? But they have stuff in house as well as the stuff in the cloud. And there are some companies who still haven't migrated to the cloud. They prefer to keep everything in house. So there are examples, right? So I'm not discarding that, but I'm just saying from a majority of people who uses cloud, right? So or they don't run a data center, so they might have like a butcher shop, right? Butcher shop, obviously, why do they need a data center for their butcher information? They can use Salesforce, right? We pretty much to store the data. They don't need a data center for it. But that being said, that when you run a butcher shop, right, or you have a plan which do meat processing, so you need to factor your electricity consumption, you need to factor your waste, a lot of things you need to factor that, right? So that needs to be captured, yeah, and that will roll into the carbon footprint record, and that will obviously roll into your annual emission inventory information in a nutshell, right? So that's how all these things work together, and it's really great tech in my opinion. I don't think most there are lots of net zero platform out there which captures information the way Salesforce does. Salesforce is pretty good. I do appreciate the fact that license can be a bit expensive, but if you're a big firm, most likely, you will be able to absorb the license, provided if you already have Salesforce in place. Even if you don't, you can still use it to track your track your um, carbon emission. And that being said, there must be there might be, I mean, some companies out there, they might be using in-house development to capture that as well, right? Uh, but in my opinion, I think Salesforce Net Zero Cloud is still one of the best out there, right? Unfortunately, the adoption rate is a bit lower, but that's fine. Like I said at the time, that is a new tech, so it will take some time to catch up, right? So when that happens, then I would be very happy to say that Net Zero Cloud will be one of the best uh, cloud out there, which will help industries to achieve their net zero emission. Right. So that being said, that's all I wanted to cover in this episode. Hope you guys have an amazing Tuesday. Adios.